Dear student, this is Professor Dr. Zia Ahmed from University of Southern Punjab, and we are meeting with respect to online education. Dear students, we have been working on the classical poetry, and today's lecture is also about that. Here we shall be more concerned with the style of classical poetry. And when I say style, by the way, I mean the form of poetry, the language of the poetry, and expressions which are used by the poets in that poetry. So today's lecture, it is less about the content of poetry, it is more about the literary devices which the people use or the selection of the words which the poets have been using, and we shall be trying to understand what are the major features of the style of this poetry. I shall start with the grand style of Milton. And here you will be, invoking yourself to see how it is grand. Definitely, when we say that word grand, we mean not only grand sentences, but also grand words, and that will combine together with some of the poetic devices, and it will make the style grand. So Milton used this type of style, that is why we call it to be grand. Now, the language and the form which all these poets of classical era took, they were taken from the classical poets like Virgil and Homer, etc. So that is why this is the part of the classical poetry. But then there are some of the contributions that our poets have been making, and this is what we want to understand through it. But keep in mind all the time when you are attending my lecture about this topic that there were aestheticism and the kind of instruction combined together in the classical poetry. Everywhere it has to happen that poetry as a form of literature has to deliver something for the people that the people can understand, in the sense enjoy also and then practice also for the good morals of the society. So when this type of poetry is there, some forms will become quite dominant. One form is the heroic couplet, and the other form is the blank verse. These two forms of poetry were practiced by the classical poets also, and our people in this age from 1400 to 1800, like Chaucer, Shakespeare, Milton, and Pope also practiced this kind of thing. Let us see how this thing happens. And I may remind that not only these two things will be talked in the lecture, but more things will also be added as we are talking about the style of these poets. When we say the style, let's first say here what could be the possible difference between Chaucer's heroic couplets and then the blank verse of Milton. Both forms or the style are having pentameters in it. It means 10 syllables would be there. Meter is rise and up, rise and down of the voice combined together. 2 syllables, 1 syllable which rises, the sound of course, and 1 syllable which takes the same sound down. In that way cadence is produced, harmony is produced, music is produced, and that would be definitely a kind of musicality which is given to poetry by the poet by making his choice of those syllables in that way. And so what we are finding here is harmony and musicality in both the forms. One is heroic couplet, other is the blank verse. But Chaucer practiced this heroic couplet in a different way, and Milton practiced in a different way. Chaucer rhymed the ending lines of his poetry, but Milton did not. He had more voice to give to that. Same is the case with Shakespeare in his dramas, not necessarily in his poetry. He practiced the same blank verse in his dramas also. As the Dr. Faustus, the drama was written by Marlowe, he also practiced the same blank verse. So these are two basic, you can say, structures of poetry which these classical poets formed out. And when we have talked about these structures, we shall see what further things are done. For example, if you read Chaucer's first page of the Canterbury Tales, you find he's talking about nature. First he says that the water is coming, then he says the air is blowing, the scent is beautiful, spring season has come, and the birds are chirping, and such a season, the human beings are ready to go on their religious pilgrimages. So what he has done actually, he has included nature in his poetry. Image of nature or imagery of nature plentifully would be available in the poetry of these people, and that is why Chaucer also contributed in that way, that his style included imagery of nature. Same possibly, we can talk about this Milton's Paradise Lost as well, because in Paradise Lost, first of all, unrhymed iambic pentameter is present. That means blank verse is present. Because this blank word lent the edge of flexibility and discipline to Milton. And therefore, when you read his poetry, you find number of things which are combined together by him. The most difficult topic to be understood, that topic has been explained by him in a very free way, in a very artistic way, and that is why this is going to the benefit of that blank verse. And along with that blank verse, Milton introduced the diction, which is the specific diction for writing epic poetry. He brought number of things new in his poetry because man was the basic target, man was the basic center around whom the whole poetry of Milton was revolving, and he tried to connect his poetry from man to God, from man to universe. So he talks more of the cosmic order as compared to the individual or the earthly order. So that is why Milton's style combined all these things. But these two styles reflect humanism. As I said, that Milton talks about this human being instead of talking about gods and goddesses more. That is why humanistic element definitely would enter because of the Renaissance. By the way, we must understand a little bit about Renaissance as well. Renaissance mostly is translated as revival of knowledge. The question is that which knowledge? You can answer very simply by saying knowledge which came from the Greek people. The Greek people, wrote literature and a lot of knowledge they provided. The same literature traveled towards Europe when there was a problem in Europe. We don't need to discuss what was the problem. But then, because of the arrival of these books in Europe, everybody started to read and write. And so it was the revival of the knowledge. For example, if you look at Shakespeare's sonnet, which is numbered by him as 18, there he says, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" Now, this comparison is with nature, not with anything else. In the past time, we had the comparisons with some mysterious mythological things as well. So that is the difference between the style of these people, the classical poets of English, as compared to the poets which we used to write in the past time. So diction is changed, style of form or structure is changed, and then the poets continue to add into different things. That is why Alexander Pope's style was called New Classical Style. Classical style, Milton style, and New Classical style, that of the Alexander Pope. He explains this thing in his essay on criticism that was written in 1711. He explained very well what he wants to say. For example, he says, "True wit is nature to advantage dressed." According to him, if you speak something, it should be hidden, it should be covered, and that should be left to the reader, that he should come forward to open it, to understand it, and to further deliver and enjoy it. So that was a little bit Horatian style, style of Horace, that the words should hide the art in it. Nobody should be able to come to know what this art means, but with the discovery, understanding, one can have this. So that was another kind of artistic device used by him, which would come in the form of art, as we have here. So with the passage of time, if we continue to proceed further, we shall find more and more things in the poetry and the style of these people. For example, imagery and symbolism. These are the two major things which classical poets practiced. For example, if you read Milton's Paradise Lost, in one of the passages, I'm trying to tell in the easiest possible word, that's a very difficult one, Milton suggests what is the appearance of the faces of angels which have fallen from heaven and have fallen into hell. Their faces were burnt. Now, instead of saying that their faces were burnt, he said, as when thunder and lightning shines on the tops of the trees are burnt up, though the trees keep standing. That was the same situation of the faces of the angels which were burnt. So how beautifully he explains the situation of the faces of the angels. Such type of imagery was introduced by the classical poets. I already talked about Chaucer, that he also introduced nature imagery in his poetry. Same was the case done by other classical poets also. Milton, for example, says, "Hail, holy light, offspring of heaven, firstborn, light becomes both as physical and metaphysical in his poetry." Chaucer's poetry again and again revolves around man and his interaction with nature. Although we have a very significant point here that these poets did not want to escape from nature, as later on Keats, for example, seems to be escaping from nature. They rather came together. They tried to unite these two things together, that what is the role of human, what is the role of nature, all these things they brought in combination. Then comes the tone of poetry. As a dominant feature of poetry of the classical form, the tone was most of the time rationalistic. I think my students know what is rationalistic, because poetry contains two elements in it. often. That is, one is emotional or passion element, and the second is going to be restraining element, which could be done with the help of the reason. So these poets used such structures and such diction with the help of which what they could do, they could achieve a balance between emotion and balance between the second thing is reason. That is why the age of Pope was most of the time termed as the age of reason, age of Pope, age of Augustan age, etc. All these things meant one thing, that there was a balance. This balance can be found in his poetry. The famous poem is Rape of the Lock, a very long poem, of course, but most of the time students read at least the first canto of that poetry. There you can find number of things which are relevant to that. But specific thing which Pope brings is the ridicule element. Of course, there is the classical element, there is the choice of words, very beautiful one, and alongside that, he uses rationality in such a way that the kind of thing comes before us, we feel that the things are being ridiculed. He said, for example, Pope said that he's writing this poetry to justify the ways of God towards men. How smartly, how beautifully he brings in these things. And next thing that we should talk about the style of these poets is the allusions. By the way, this word is different from illusion. Illusion is with I, allusion is with A. Illusion is something which you cannot see clearly, and allusion is referring back, referring to some other text. For example, when I'm writing, when Milton is writing Rape of the Lock, he may be alluding to or providing allusions to some of the Greek poets, and definitely there are the allusions. Same is the case with Rape of the Lock, allusions are present there. I mean, these poets, in order to link themselves with other texts, try to include some words from there so that they may be linked with the mythological aspect also and biblical aspect also. Milton's Paradise Lost is filled up with number of biblical allusions. Same is the case with Chaucer, same is the case with Shakespeare, same is the case with this last person, Alexander Pope, who uses allusions. So the next big thing about the style of these people is the use of allusions and the references. Because this thing became important to these poets, as these poets thought that they are very scholarly people. So when they refer to these classical other forms of text, they could show that they are erudite, they are scholars, they are well read. And that is why in Pope's poetry, in Milton's poetry, there will be allusions about not only Virgil, but also Homer, but also Horace. All these people will be present there. So one can say that it is the style of the poetry of these classical poets which makes it important, in the sense that the style connects them with the past poets also, and the same style brings them in the present poetry also, because present style included innovations. And so ultimately we come to these kind of findings, that how classical poetry is the most important form of poetry because of their structure, because of their form, and lastly, because of their styles, it becomes most important. It was the clarity, the moral, the gravity, and the intellectual restraint which became the hallmark of this poetry. So I think our students might have understood what is the style and its importance among the people who are called as the classical poets. That is the base, that is the foundation, because it was based on the rules of style, rules of structure. And by following that, they made their poetry so great. Yes, when this era passes, the classical era passes, the romantic era begins, some of these rules are relaxed as well. So dear students, we have done up with the style of these classical poets. I hope that everyone understand it. So see you in some next video. Thank you.